Dr. Michael Sala, author of the book, The U.S. Navy's Secret Space Program and the Nordic Extraterrestrial Alliance. Welcome to Truth Be Told. Welcome, everyone, back to Truth Be Told. I'm, of course, Captain Ron, and this is Tony Sweet with me. And we have with us today Michael Sala, whom we met at the Contact in the Desert event this year, which we had a really good conversation with. In fact, Michael, welcome to the show. We would like to start off, if we could, to pick up on the conversation that you had with Tony and I at Contact, which was talking about the new discoveries in Antarctica, where it's possibly either a Nazi base or possibly an alien base. You want to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Antarctica?
Sure. Well, basically, one of the most mysterious incidents in Antarctica happened around Lake Vostok, the area where the Russians have established the base down in Antarctica, when in 1999 they confirmed this huge lake underneath the Vostok station, about the size of Lake Ontario, and basically what happened was that initially there was a lot of interest in drilling deep down towards the lake and sending probes to kind of find out what was down there, to capture it all on film, and that was going to be a test run for future NASA missions to Europa. But then they found that there was this huge magnetic anomaly down there, and the cover story was that this was actually just a feature of the geology down there, some sort of geological process that led to this magnetic anomaly. But the magnetic anomaly is consistent with basically a 50-mile wide city, a metropolis down there. Wow. That was discovered. And so basically then the narrative shifted, NASA's narrative shifted, that now, due to environmental concerns, they weren't going to drill down there, they weren't going to send robotic probes, but instead it went covert. Raytheon basically got the Antarctica contract, and Raytheon began a covert mission to drill down there into the ice core, down deep under the ice. A congressional committee went down there, and that's when rumors began about this Antarctica city having been discovered.
Was this an active city or an abandoned city? Do we know? Basically, the city, and this is something that several whistleblowers have talked about, was a city that was flash frozen around the time of the Great Flood. So Antarctica is not millions of years old in terms of it being covered by ice over a period of millions of years. That Antarctica, going back to the flood event roughly 12,000 years ago, that was ice-free. And that there were cities, or basically metropolises, down in Antarctica. It was essentially an Atlantean colony. Now, whether it was Atlantis itself or a colony established by the Atlanteans, we don't know. But there was an active, flourishing civilization down there. And then there was the flash flooding, and that was caused by a pole shift. And so basically Antarctica shifted from being an area that was in the temperate zones of the southern hemisphere to now being smack bang in the middle of the South Pole. And very quickly everything got flash frozen, and over the period of several thousand years, you've had an ice layer which is now several miles deep. Now that makes perfect sense to me, Tony, that you would think before the pole shifted that why wouldn't there be people living there? If it was a temperate climate, humans would naturally migrate there.
Right. And I'm curious too, this is going to the climate change, and the scientists that and many of the people around the world saying, fight against climate change. That now I can see if a lot of the governments already know this exists, they don't want it to change. So this might be one of the reasons.
Well, couldn't they be primitive cities though? I mean, does it have to be an advanced civilization down there? Couldn't it just be a primitive city? How do we know that it's advanced?
Well, there's several reasons for it actually being an advanced city. First of all, there's Plato's dialogues, where he talks about this advanced city called Atlantis, describing some of its features. Then you have the Egyptian temples, like the Temple of Abydos, showing basically what appear to be jet craft and spacecraft and what would appear to be modern submarines that were part of the Temple of Abydos that is several thousand years old, which again shows an advanced culture. Basically, and then you have different kind of histories or different narratives from various cultures talking about humanity going through a golden age, into a silver age and a bronze age, and so forth. So the ancients knew that there were a time in our history where technology was much more advanced than anything that the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans had. And so this makes it perfectly feasible that Atlantis, or what's down in Antarctica, was once a very advanced city that was kind of like very quickly flash frozen in a pole shift event.
So you were saying, who was the first to discover this again? Just to recap, just so we know.
Well, basically, the first people to talk about an ancient city being discovered in in Antarctica, there was this really mysterious press release that was released around April of 2002. Maybe you saw it. It was from this outfit calling itself Atlantis. I think Atlantis Rising. Well, that was the book that was created.
Right.
Atlantis Media, I believe it was. And they put out a press release saying that there was a television crew sent down there to Antarctica, that they filmed the discovery of an ancient city, and that the crew was then detained by the US Navy. The film was confiscated and the crew hasn't been released. And, the press release was all about, we want our television crew released and all that.
Right.
Well, turns out that was really just a kind of promotional gimmick for a new book called Atlantis Rising that came out, shortly afterwards. But the thing is, this is how often the truth is hidden in plain sight. You come out with a kind of false news story, a false narrative, so people think that all of that rumors about an ancient city, that's a cover story. Richard Hoagland was probably the first kind of legitimate source to talk about an ancient city being discovered in Atlantis. He put out a long research article in 2002. He and Mike Barra,
right,
who they put out this story basically that the magnetic anomaly that was discovered around Lake Vostok, that in fact was an ancient city. So he was the first source, and since him there have been a number of others that have talked about it. And most recently, Corey Good, the Secret Space Program whistleblower, says he was taken down to this ancient city in early 2017. In January of this year, he was taken down there by this inner Earth group calling itself the Anshar, who showed him around, and he saw some of the artifacts and some of the bodies of this civilization that had been flash frozen.
Wow, that I have not heard. So what do they think it is? Do they think it's a Nazi civilization? Do they think it's older than that? This is back to 12,000-year-old one you're talking about?
That's right. Yeah, the civilization in Lake Vostok, that ancient city, that predates anything that the Nazis established down there. The Nazis, when they established themselves down there in the 1940s, they used these subterranean passageways using their submarine fleet at the time, which was very modern. Even now, some of those Nazi submarines could still be, could be used. So they were really advanced at the time, and they were able to go deep under the Antarctic ice through these waterways and basically find these huge cavern systems down there. And they were the first to find artifacts going back
thousands of years. But it was only when the U.S. military-industrial complex reached agreement with the Nazis. This happened in the 1950s under President Eisenhower, that the Nazi bases in Antarctica were considerably expanded, because now you had the U.S. military-industrial complex, like companies like Raytheon and Lockheed, AT&T, all of the major aerospace companies began working with the Nazi bases in Antarctica to build these out and develop a joint corporate Nazi space program down there under the Antarctic ice. And so they began to explore more and more of these ancient ruins. But in 2000, around 2000, that's when they basically discovered Lake Vostok. And by 2001, they were able to find that there was this huge magnetic anomaly down there, which was a city. And that really just opened things up, because then all of a sudden this became a joint international program. The Russians, the French, and the Americans established a joint mission to drill down deep into Lake Vostok. And so it became an international venture. And now it is something that has been for the last 15 years now excavated secretly by joint international missions. And they're on the verge of announcing this.
Really?
Tony, you've got to put this together as a script. You got Nazis driving around secret tunnels underneath Antarctica ice, finding ancient civilizations. I mean, that's a script right there,
That
man.
is a script. It'll be a Hollywood movie.
Do you really think that they would release this to the public at all? I mean, if there's any truth to this, there's no way they're going to announce this, right?
Well, they are on the verge of announcing this. I mean, this is the reason why in 2016 you had so many VIPs going down to Antarctica. You had Buzz Aldrin, John Kerry, you had the Russian Patriarch, Australia's Governor General, a lot of VIPs. You actually had even Newt Gingrich going down there. That's something a lot of people don't know. Newt Gingrich went down there in January of this year as Donald Trump's emissary to find out what is going on down in Antarctica. So come this Antarctic summer, we're talking about December of 2017, January 2018. We are very likely going to see some kind of an announcement. It's very much a possibility.
That would be awesome.
So once they announce this, what's it going to change? I know this is could be just a new discovery, because it's not, we're discovering new civilizations all the time, or a new pyramid all the time. So what is this going to change our view on?
Well, this announcement is something that basically will allow those in charge of the secret space programs, especially what's been discovered in Antarctica, to control the narrative, because no one has easy access to Antarctica.
Right.
So basically, what they can do is just control the narrative about what kind of ancient technologies exist. Whether or not there were civilizations built in Antarctica, the existence of pole shifts. Right there you're going to have something that'll rock the foundations of Western science, that pole shifts are something real that have occurred in the past, that there were these ancient civilizations built in Antarctica, and then they can kind of roll out things at their own pace in terms of some of the technologies found in Antarctica are revolutionary technologies, things like free energy, kind of advanced health healing modalities, that they can roll out things in their own pace, and eventually there'll be some sort of announcement concerning the role of extraterrestrials in developing a civilization in the past. So this, I think, is all going to be part of the disclosures that we're going to see coming out of Antarctica, and that'll be a great segue for them to then go to the next level, which is to say that, by the way, the U.S. Air Force has developed its own secret space program. We have
space stations orbiting around 200 to 300 miles in the around the Earth that are far more advanced than the International Space Station, anti-gravity TR-3B vehicles that service these space stations. So they'll be able to kind of unfold that.
You think they're going to admit that to the public?
I think that's exactly what they plan to do. I
Wow.
think that there's some kind of timetable here in terms of revealing things. There are certain dynamics as to why this has to be revealed now. But according to the sources that I've been working with, they're going to high gear. And we see this. We see this with what's been happening with Antarctica. Just the number of people who've been going down there, high-level dignitaries coming back. These people are being briefed. And then we also have information about the U.S. Air Force secret space program. I mean, you have two retired Air Force generals going on the public record about the Air Force having a secret space program. They've been working with Tom DeLonge, the famous rock star,
Right.
and this is something that was actually released in the WikiLeaks. Releases of the John Podesta emails, where they were talking about the Air Force secret space program. So this is something that is being slowly rolled out, and people are being encouraged to come forward and reveal the information. I actually posted an article just this morning about someone who is working with a covert operative out of MacDill Air Force Base down there in Tampa, Florida. And my source down there took photos of a TR-3B flying over MacDill Air Force Base in broad daylight, and the photos are there on my website. You see the TR-3B, clearly a triangular vehicle, and then you see it powering up where the circular ring where the plasma, the high energy and pressurized plasma circulates, creating this kind of energy pulse, and you see this triangular craft then surrounded by a circular beam of light before it shoots off up into the upper atmosphere. So there are 6 photos there on my website, and people can see it right there. So my source down there is being encouraged to come forward with this information.
Doctor, before we get off of Antarctica, what is your take on the UFO or alien presence in Antarctica? Do you feel that there's something there? Because I know you feel that our governments are tied in with the extraterrestrials. Do you think it has something to do with Antarctica?
Yes, definitely there is an extraterrestrial presence in Antarctica. I mean, we need to always keep in mind that Antarctica is huge. We're talking about a landmass which is 1.5 times the size of the United States. So
Wow.
it's vast.
I don't think people
there.
think that. I think if you ask the average person on the street, they'd say Texas.
You're right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're talking about a landmass down there that is huge. Yeah. So you have the Nazis that established bases up in New Schwabenland. You have extraterrestrials that have been there for thousands of years with enormous bases as well. And then you have more recently bases that have been jointly developed by the U.S. military-industrial complex with the Nazis as a result of secret agreements reached during the Eisenhower administration.
I was just going to go there, Doc. I was going to ask if you could touch on the Eisenhower thing for our audience. I'm sure most of us are familiar with that story about how Eisenhower, don't you think like 500 people witnessed him seeing an alien or whatever, or at least having that meeting?
Well, that's right. There were 2 covered meetings or known meetings. One at Edwards Air Force Base in 1954, February of 1954, and another one in February of 1955 at Holloman Air Force Base. And the Holloman Air Force Base meeting, that was the one where agreements were reached with this Nazi extraterrestrial alliance. And from that moment on, basically, the U.S. military-industrial complex began working full-time with the the Nazis based in Antarctica. So you had Operation Paperclip going into overdrive, where all of a sudden these Nazi scientists were given high-level security clearances into the military-industrial complex. They got senior positions leading these programs, and this was a result of this full-blown cooperation between the Nazis and the Eisenhower administration. And part of this cooperation meant that all of the facilities that were in Antarctica that had been established by the Nazis, these increased dramatically. The US used Operation Deep Freeze as the cover for sending enormous resources down into Antarctica. And the International Geophysical Year from 1957-58 was a cover for international cooperation for establishing bases all over Antarctica. And this was the cover for the Eisenhower administration to help expand these bases underneath the ice, because really, where the real action is, it's underneath that, 2-mile ice pack covering Antarctica. That, what's happening on the surface, these are just cover programs where scientists talk about, environmental concerns and degradation, right. But it's under the ice pack where all of the advanced technologies and the space program exist.
Man, if it's true, it seems like it's plausible, because we wouldn't know. How would we know? Nobody could even get down there.
Right. And
it's so remote.
Now, was Eisenhower, was this right after, because this was in 1955, correct? When he met?
That's when the final, agreements were reached. The ink was dried. Right. Eisenhower was fully on board now. And, Eisenhower, I think, went into this with his eyes open in terms of knowing that, there was quite a real chance of deception here, that the U.S. would be manipulated by the Nazis in Antarctica, who basically had much more advanced technology. That the 1952 Washington flyover, just think of it, that these were not extraterrestrial UFOs, that these were Nazi UFOs flying over Washington, D.C., wow. and that the U.S. military could do nothing about it. That's how advanced the Nazi space program had become. So Eisenhower had no choice. He had to reach an agreement with the Nazis, and basically he knew that the Nazis had the best hand, and that they were going to probably outsmart the US. And this is why by the end of his administration, he was warning about the dangers of the military-industrial complex.
Scary stuff.
If the Nazis were that advanced, how did we even win, quote, quote, win the war? Or did we? Or did we?
Well, basically what was happening was that, the Nazis had established two programs, an advanced kind of space program in Antarctica during the war, and also a weaponization program where they hoped to weaponize flying saucers. So basically you had both things happening during World War II. And what happened in Germany was that basically Hitler's regime ran out of time. Their space program down there, their weaponization program, just ran out of time. They basically were months short of successfully weaponizing their advanced V2 rockets, for being able to send nuclear weapons into New York, and to weaponize flying saucers to start shooting down the massive bomber fleets that were flying over Germany. They had just run out of time. So while Nazi Germany collapsed in Europe, the Germans in Antarctica had more time. And it was only in 1946-47 that the Navy was able to send a flotilla down there, Operation High Jump, to Antarctica. And the Germans down there had an additional 2 years to prepare. And basically they had now weaponized the flying saucers so that they had flying saucers that could basically use laser cannons against the ships and the aircraft that Admiral Byrd had at his disposal. So basically that was the first engagement after the Second World War, where the German redoubt in Antarctica proved that Nazi Germany had successfully relocated and was able to resume and exert its military power out of Antarctica.
Hold on, it's interesting, Doctor, that you said that was like 46, 47 when they got the flying saucers weaponized. Roswell was 47.
Right, right.
So that seems like to really sync up there. Does that tie in, do you think?
Well, that's right. In 47, where you had all of these waves of flying saucer sightings over the US, that some of these, I'm not saying all of them, but some of these were actually part of this Nazi space program. And certainly, there are many incidents. I mean, we have the 1952 Washington flyover. We have incidents of a Nazi UFO basically being involved in the Betty and Barney Hill case. Mm-hmm. The initial description by Barney Hill of that 1961 abduction, he actually talked about these blonde Nazi-looking people in trench coats on the flying saucers. And that eventually kind of got filtered out, but you had it there. Then there were other stories. I believe 1964 there was a Nazi UFO landing in Hawaii. So again, just many stories, many rumors of the Nazis continuing to operate. But yes, they were able to weaponize their flying saucers in time, so that then they were able to continue with establishing what is now the Fourth Reich, because the agreement with Eisenhower in 1955 enabled the Fourth Reich to emerge not as a world empire, but as a kind of global economic force with a secret space program operating out of Antarctica.
Well, if you guys are just tuning in, we're talking to Dr. Michael Salla. He wrote the book, many books, but we're kind of touching on the book, the U.S. Navy's Secret Space Program and Nordic Extraterrestrial Alliance. We've touched on some great subjects here today, and but we're going to take just a 30-second break. We got to pay some bills. So when we come back, we have a lot more questions, and if you guys are in the chat room, please leave some questions. We'd love to ask directly from you. So,
do you feel that possibly those haven't been released because of something in there could be written about UFOs or extraterrestrials or anything like that?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, I mean, these things that refer to ancient cultures and some kind of reference to advanced technologies that the ancients were using. So, some of this was because of the gods or the fallen angels or these beings that actually help human civilization take off. So, the Dead Sea Scrolls probably talk at length about some of that. And I think maybe that's why the kind of the science community or the religious theological community has been so slow in releasing these into the public.
We talked the other day about the Marilyn Monroe case. We had Professor Fetzer in here, and we were talking about what was his name? Stephen Greer mentioned that he thought that perhaps she was taken out because of her releasing UFO knowledge. Do you think there's anything involved with JFK and the UFO stuff as well?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think JFK. He was someone that was very knowledgeable about the whole Nazi connection to secret space programs and the UFO issue, because he was down there in Germany immediately after the Second World War as a guest of James Forrestal, who was the Secretary of the Navy. So Kennedy was given a tour of some of the captured Nazi technologies and given an idea of what the Navy was prioritizing in terms of developing some of these technologies for a future Navy space program.
Wow,
scary stuff.
That is scary stuff. And do you feel that JFK and his family, because do you think Robert Kennedy also had knowledge of this, and maybe that was another reason, because he was running for president, that would give him more of power to release this information, or do you think that was just a isolated incident?
Oh no, I think both Robert and John F. Kennedy, they both knew about what was really going on in terms of these secret agreements between the U.S. and the Germans out of Antarctica. The thing to keep in mind is that both Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, he actually was a supporter and admirer of the Nazi regime. He actually had donated to the Nazi cause, and I think that Joe Kennedy, that he was the reason, one of the factors clearly, people know that he had mob connections and that this was a critical aspect of John F. Kennedy winning the presidential election. What people don't realize is that Joseph Kennedy also had Nazi connections, and this was equally as important, if not more important, than the mafia connection in getting John F. Kennedy elected, because they really thought that basically the Nazis really thought that a Kennedy administration would be easier to manipulate than a Nixon administration, because Nixon was a protege of Eisenhower, and Eisenhower had become much more independent. So they really thought that they could manipulate the Kennedys through Joe Kennedy. But soon after Kennedy won the presidential election, Joe Kennedy suffered a stroke, and so he was basically unable to steer the Kennedy administration in the direction that the Nazis and the mafia wanted, and that's when the problems really began for John F. Kennedy.
It's such a tangled web, just like we talked about the other day with JFK. That there's just so many things there. Now you're expanding it to the mob and to the Nazis. I mean, it's all tied in.
Yeah.
It just makes you think of the Illuminati stuff, that it's all tied to one. Somebody else is in control, kind of a thing.
Well,
right?
I think I talked to last week to Standeo, and he was talking about, he's a former FBI informant, and he was talking about the Nordics, and he feels the same way about you. And could you tell the audience your take on, because I know there's not just one or two different species of aliens, at least that have come here and that are present on our planet. How many? Because you said there's quite a few. There's how many different species of aliens that are on our planet, do you feel?
Yeah, well, that's the big shock a lot of people are going to have when they encounter this information. Back in 2013, I wrote a book called Galactic Diplomacy, and in that book, I basically outlined 20 different extraterrestrial civilizations.
Wow.
20 that have been interacting with humanity. And so I give a lot of examples for each one of these, what they're doing, who the contactees are, who the experiences are, talking about each of these. But there are 20. A more accurate is probably somewhere in the vicinity of between 40 to 60 that are intervening in human affairs in some way, and they span the spectrum from the good, the bad, and the indifferent. I mean, that's probably an accurate description of them. And the ones that we would see as being good, benevolent, ethical extraterrestrial beings, they're by far in the majority. But nevertheless, the ones that are more negative and more manipulative, even though they're a minority, they're still very powerful because they're unscrupulous, just as a criminal class, just as in any society that is going through a transition. Look at Russia, post-Soviet Russia. How it went through its transition, where the kind of the mob took off down there and had enormous power. Same in on our planet. We're going through an enormous transition, and the criminal class. The criminal extraterrestrial class has enormous influence behind the scenes.
It seems to me that this becomes much less plausible, the abductions phenomenon, as you say there's 40 to 60 different races here, because they're still clandestine. I mean, we don't know about them. Now to say that there's 60 different races doing this, and to say that nobody knows about it, that becomes even harder. It's hard enough to believe one. Now you're going to have 60. You think somebody would make themselves known. If Eisenhower cut this deal with the aliens, as you were alleging earlier, is that with one group, or did we have a table of 40 different aliens sit down with Eisenhower, a grand meeting?
Like the United Nations
right.
of...
What is the story on that, you think?
I think Eisenhower met several delegations, and each delegation of extraterrestrials had something on the table in terms of what they thought Eisenhower would accept. One group was a more kind of benevolent group, and they offered him assistance in terms of dealing with global problems. But one of the key conditions was that the hydrogen bomb development had to stop. So Eisenhower's national security team said no to that. The other group of extraterrestrials were okay. They were comfortable with Eisenhower's administration developing hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear weapons. Deals were reached. They began working with the Germans out of Antarctica. And there are quite a number of whistleblowers that have talked about these negotiations and these agreements. The most recent document that's been released, this is one that is it's still controversial, but I think it's genuine. This was released early this year. It's a Defense Intelligence Agency document dating from 1989, just from the end of the Reagan presidency and the beginning of the first Bush presidency. And this Defense Intelligence Agency document described 4 different groups or physiological characteristics of extraterrestrials. They described the kind of human-looking Nordic group. They described a non-human group, kind of like the Greys. They described another non-human group, kind of like insect-like, and then they describe another group, kind of like almost like an interdimensional type that have no distinct physiological characteristics. So this is an Air Force document that was put together in 1989, and that was recently leaked, talking about 4 different groups, and that Eisenhower had been conducting negotiations with these groups. Now, this is a document that it gets a lot of controversy. People believe it's an outright fraud. Others believe it's genuine. I think it can be both. I think you can have genuine elements in there talking about these diplomatic meetings that the Eisenhower administration had been conducting with different extraterrestrial groups. But at the same time, there can be disinformation in there in order to maintain plausible deniability. So, but I believe that the document has enough elements of truth in there that we need to take it seriously, but it is a document that the Defense Intelligence Agency compiled back in 1989 that talks about some of these diplomatic meetings that Eisenhower had been conducting.
What do you think he negotiated there? Do you think he allowed human abduction for technology, that kind of a thing?
That was part of it, yes, that agreements were reached where people would be taken and that they would be experimented on and then returned unharmed with their memories wiped. That seems to be one of the conditions for these agreements. And it kind of helps explain the abduction phenomenon, because estimates are that 2 to 3% of the American population have been abducted. So we're talking anywhere from 6 million to nearly 10 million Americans being abducted.
It's insane.
But most of them don't remember because their memories are wiped. But a few do remember, and they're the ones that we read about in the abduction literature.
I'm curious because Eisenhower met with the aliens. So was this the first president, due to the Nazis bringing this to the forefront, was this the first president to meet face-to-face with aliens? Because, I mean, if they've been here for millions of years, we've had, a lot of presidents before that have been running our country. So was it the Nazis that actually brought the alien meetings to the forefront? And then I'm curious on how did the Nazis find this information?
I think what happened with Nazi Germany is really a key to understanding the dynamics of what happened afterwards, because essentially, according to the sources that I've been working with, and this is very recently William Tompkins, who actually worked in a covert espionage mission for the Navy during World War II, he said that the Navy learned from its covert operatives in Nazi Germany that the Germans or Hitler's regime had reached an agreement with with a reptilian-looking group of extraterrestrials who were giving the Nazis advanced technologies for development for the war effort. Obviously this was something that the U.S. Navy at the time would have been very concerned about. Whether it was true or not, and whether extraterrestrials were helping the Nazis. And what William Tompkins said is that then the Navy began being assisted by another group of extraterrestrials, a competing group, who began kind of helping the Navy in a kind of much more covert way in developing advanced technologies that were intended on neutralizing what the Germans were getting from the reptilian extraterrestrials. So essentially the Second World War, as it unfolded, it became a proxy war where both the Axis powers and the Allied powers were secretly the proxies for competing extraterrestrial groups. This is one of the kind of unknown aspects of our history on the planet. But this is one of the things that officially was known to the Roosevelt administration, and then later on by the Truman and then Eisenhower administrations.
It feels like their technology would be so vastly beyond ours that it would be silly to even trade technology. It just seems like them giving us technology. Theirs is, even how they get here must be so beyond anything we have. It's hard to kind of comprehend that they would offer. It'd be like offering us something very simple from their standpoint. Advanced technology to us, to them, must be nothing.
Well, this is where we really kind of need to go into the history of how all this unfolded. But essentially, the level of technological development in the early 20th century had reached a sufficient level where all of a sudden, we could make a quantum leap from a kind of insular planetary society into a galactic civilization. We had people like Nikola Tesla, Thomas Townsend Brown, Hans Kolmer in Germany, and others that were developing free energy devices, that were pioneering kind of teleportation technologies, the Philadelphia experiment. All of these things were happening in the 1920s and 30s. Right. So even though it might seem to us on the surface that, why would advanced cultures thousands of years ahead, make contact and want to trade with us? The thing was, at the early 20th century, we had made a profound breakthrough, and that we were making that transition into a galactic culture. And so this is when the galactics really paid attention. And in fact, this Defense Intelligence Agency document, it actually pinpoints, it actually says that we became of interest to the galactics when Nikola Tesla and Marconi basically were able to develop kind of weapons technologies. Tesla in particular were able to develop weapons technology that used the Earth's kind of magnetic field to send energy into space. So this is how Tesla and Marconi, when they began to transmit radio waves into outer space, like the Tesla Tower at Wardenclyffe, Tesla didn't realize it, but he had actually developed an advanced weapons technology because he was tapping into the Earth's magnetic field in order to send these powerful radio waves out into deep space. Wow. So the galactics began to respond to that. So that's when you have Tesla and Marconi saying, hey, we're starting to get radio transmission from extraterrestrial civilizations here. No one believed them at the time, but in fact that's exactly what was happening. And this Defense Intelligence Agency document says that it was in those communications that had been established by Tesla and then Marconi that's when the galactics began communicating with humanity, and that shortly afterwards, that's when the galactics sent their spacecraft out here to begin formally interacting with Earth governments and citizens.
That was in the news just in the last 48 hours, if you Google this, that we've recently heard other radio transmissions
I saw that.
Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
So there you go. It's going to come back, Doc. Doc, we're running out of time, and it's a shame because everything you go into is very, very thorough and wonderful. I wanted to ask you one more thing. Do you feel that the MJ-12 documents are authentic?
I do. I think that this was a way in which insiders could reveal a lot of the truth about what's been happening behind the scenes, but do it in a way which maintains plausible deniability. Because I think this is one of the things we need to remember, that there are a lot of people within the system that do want the truth to come out, but there are those that don't want it. So a compromise was reached, and that compromise involved the truth being revealed through whistleblowers and through these leaked documents where people could know what was going on, but it was done in a way that maintained plausible deniability, because these leaked documents have not been authenticated by any government departments or military departments, but yet the research that's been done on them by document authenticators like Dr. Robert Wood and Stanton Friedman and others show that these documents, some of them at least, are absolutely authentic.
It makes so much sense to me too that that's what we would do if this was going on. Right. We would form this thing of this think tank of these high-end guys that would know about that stuff.
Well, I mean, this hour flew by.
Sure did.
And once again, that you have blown our minds and gave some great information. We hope our listeners enjoyed and viewers enjoy. Go to exopolitics.org, and I see you update all the time new information, articles that people can enjoy on a daily basis. So, again, thank you so much, Dr. Sala, for joining us. We really appreciate you doing this again. And anything coming up, new book coming out, you going to be at any other events that people can come see you at?
Sure. I'm working on a new book which is going to be focusing on Antarctica, the secret history of Antarctica, right up into the present day. So I'm going to have a lot of information in there that kind of expands on what I've been talking about. I'm regularly updating people through the exopolitics.org website, and I encourage listeners to just take a look at this most recent article about the TR-3B vehicle that was captured over MacDill Air Force Base, because I think that this is part of the slow release of this U.S. Air Force secret space program.
Nice. Well,
very cool.
Thank you guys for tuning in. We really appreciate you. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and iHeart and wherever else you can find us.